Here we are for another AgriVisions program brought to you by First Dakota National Bank. I'm Nate Franzine, President of Ag Banking, and your host for our program. Joining me today is Alan Hoyer, a legacy consultant for our Keep Farmers Farming consulting efforts.
Yeah, interesting journey it's been. I'm actually a dairy production major out of South Dakota State. I grew up at Oldham, kind of one step back. I'm from a farm and a ranch. I've always been in agriculture. And dairy farm. So I went to South Dakota State and took dairy production. So I didn't take psychology or anything like that. I took a psychology class, but very much that's the type of work we do today. But I have a farm and ranch with my wife and my son and his wife. And Blake runs the operation. I'm proud of the fact that he runs the operation. I work for him. So our conversation's about getting me up to speed. So when I get home, and then on Saturdays, when I come out in the morning, I don't wonder what to do. I'm going to do something because I'm ready to get out and do something. But that's how I'm raised. So, so then I worked, spent about 18 years in agribusiness, sales management for several organizations before ultimately got into this journey. And it was interesting. I was ready for a change. I wanted to work closely with farmers and ranchers. Had some neighbors that had called and wondered how we thought we could bring all three of our children back with what we had to work with, because we're a first generation operation. We're just working it and never thought about not. I just figured they'd all get married and their spouses that have off farm jobs, and we just work the business. And from my perspective, they had so much, and they looked at us and wondered how we thought we could do what we did, and yet they were calling us for help. So that was kind of the initial idea, that there was a place for this type of work, and I didn't know how to go about it. The next part of the journey, that's why I took Sodaro. When it's Sodaro, I figured to get connected. I needed to get connected to create some type of consulting service, and lo and behold, that's how I met First Dakota through you.
Yeah.
That's part of the journey.
Yeah, Sodaro, we can't say enough good about South Dakota Ag and Rural Leadership.
No.
It's what led to this,
Yeah.
but it's led to a lot of great things across the industry.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
when Sodaro comes up, you got to put a plug in for just the real
Absolutely.
benefit of that program.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about the history of Keep Farmers Farming, and I'll start it, Alan, by sharing a little bit on the bank side, and then I'll turn to you to connect the dots on why you brought up Sodaro and how that led to you and I connecting. So probably back in about 2010, 2011, in a strategic planning process, First Dakota was evaluating what can we do for our clients? What is missing out in the marketplace that we might be able to help with? And two big things came up. Number one was, how do we help the next generation get involved in the business?
Right.
And through our strategic planning process at that time, we came up with our Emerging Farmer and Rancher program, our Beginning Farmer and Rancher program, which we've had going now for years and years. That was the execution of how we can play a role helping the next generation in agriculture. And our whole goal with that educational program is to educate so that when the time comes and the opportunity comes, they're as prepared as possible to be the leaders, the next generation of leaders for their farms and ranches. The other thing that came up in that same strategic planning session is an observation by all of our ag bankers that our customers were really struggling with the process. They're really struggling with estate planning, transition planning, communication. How do we communicate this to the kids? How do we get it done? How do we put the legal documents in place to make it happen? And so we sat back as a team and said, what can the bank do to help that?
Yep.
And that's when the idea of Keep Farmers Farming really started. And fast forward to when you and I connected, and I'll let you tell that part of the story.
That's pretty cool, actually.
We'd been working on it for 2 or 3 years, trying to figure out how can we make sense of this? How can we pull together a consulting effort within our ag division to help with this? And so why don't you take it from there and talk about how we connected and how it kind of got started.
Yeah, it's an interesting story. I did meet Denny Everson at Sodaro, and I met Nate, and we had our Sodaro seminar going on in Mitchell this particular week. Well, lo and behold, South Dakota throws a blizzard at us, and we were sent home early, a day early. And of course, I was the oldest guy in the class, and I'm the only one that didn't listen. So everybody else went home, and I just had a feeling that I wanted to call Nate and see if he had a little time. Because as I studied First Coat, I seen a lot of leadership, and I seen the beginning farmer program, which we called it at that time. I thought, you know, I had some ideas. Would they be interested? There's some ideas to expand it. And literally, I called Nate on the interstate and just see if he had a little time. He said, yeah, come on down. And so I did. So the blizzard in Sadaro was Allen's blizzard, because without that blizzard, I never would have taken time. So I consider this stuff part of Ag Mission. I believe it's a calling in a way, and I believe that blizzard was Allen's blizzard to create that moment to go to Yankton that day, and we sat down and we're just having a conversation just like this. We're rolling out ideas, and lo and behold, Nate had this file called Keep Farmers Farming on his desk, and he's trying to figure out who in the world we're going to hire to do this stuff. So we literally, that's how it came together. And then then the rest of the journey is all history from there. But it really was that simple. It was an idea about helping people.
I got to share. So when Alan called me after that Sadaro meeting, and I was there the night before and addressed your class, when you called to say, you know, can you make some time? I said, absolutely. I had no idea why he was coming to see me. I honestly thought, well, maybe he's looking for a new loan for his farming operation, and maybe we can be a client, or you know, he could become a client of ours. And when Alan came into my office, we sat down around my conference table and started talking. I just remember trying to fight back the smirk in my face, because as Alan's telling me so passionately about what he wants to do and how he wants to help and do things for the industry, it was aligning perfectly with the strategy we had talked about 3 years prior that we hadn't figured out how to execute on yet.
Sure.
So it was one of those deals that, you know, call it fate, call it what you want, but it's part of the passion behind the program, and it's why both you and I share a great deal of pride in the mission of what you're doing every day. So that's the history, and it's a fun one to talk about. One other part of the history I'd like to share, we have an Ag Advisory Board with the bank, and we put that together back in about that same time frame. And we use that group of leaders in the industry as a sounding board, and we challenge them to tell us how we're doing. We challenge them to tell us how we can get better. And they knew we were trying to pull this Keep Farmers Farming strategy together, and they knew we were struggling with it. And I'll never forget, I went to a meeting before I met Alan. I went to a meeting with the Ag Advisory Board and said, you know what, we know it's a need out there, but we just can't figure out how to make it happen, how to get the right people in place to make this happen. And I had a mini riot on my hand, quite frankly. You know, everyone around the room said, Nate, this is such a big need for our industry, and there's nobody better positioned than First Dakota National Bank to help. And so I left that meeting with a new source of energy and passion to say, okay, we can't put this on the shelf. We can't stop trying. And so I had a new bit of motivation. And again, that's when fate occurred, and you and I had the conversation. So quite a story, and quite a fun way to show value to strategic planning, value to having an Ag Advisory Board, to having a sounding board of people that challenge you to really think about how you make your business better. So
big ideas can come out of humble beginnings.
Yeah.
That's literally what it was.
Yeah, that's
People's
very true.
hearts are in the right spot. That's critical.
Very true. So let's segue from the history then to what it is you actually do, Alan, right? Talk about estate planning, transition planning, exit planning. What does all those terms mean, and how do you make sense of it all when you sit down with a family operation?
Yeah, it's interesting because people say, where do you start? I'll say coffee. Let's just sit down and talk. Because going up the driveway for the first time, and most of the time I don't know people. I get these calls, I've never met them. And I would say in a very short period of time, we're getting in some of the most intimate conversations they're going to have with anybody. And it comes back to, these are all different kinds of growing pains going on in agriculture, but it's also the most important thing that people know they have to get right. If they don't get this right, they're going to look back someday and feel like they failed. And so I had to, over time, build process around this. So going into it, I don't know if it's estate planning or it's transition planning. Another one I throw in there is called exit planning. But usually I approach it thinking it's a transitional piece first. And so we'll sit down and we're talking there, and people want to talk about their operation, their family, so I'm all ears. And I'm listening to see, okay, we trying to bring the children into the operation? Are we trying to get the operation organized? And then I'll start with the questions, tell me about your financial system, because we're going to have costs of the system we bring the kids in. And at the end of the day, we have to have profit. So that's that conversation around that. But my formula is actually very simple. And the formula is this, and you have to follow it, otherwise you're going to find yourself down the road wishing you had, because you got to back up. And so to understand where you're going, you first have to understand who you are. And to find out who you are, you got to look back as to where you came from. And so history creates a vision, which creates strategic execution. Most people that are public speaking are talking about strategies. And I will say, I don't even know where we're going yet. Everybody wants to go to strategy because we want to have the pain relief. And we got to back up. We got to do this thing right. I've been in too many of these, and that is so important to go back to history, because they'll find out most of the strategies that they're going to deploy have already been deployed. And so therefore, it just normalizes everything. And so that's a big part of it. And as you're going through the transition part of it, there's probably a point in time where people need to get out. It's called exit planning. How do we prepare for the moment when mom and dad wish to get out of the operating side of their business? I mean, it takes funds, it takes strategy. We got tax implications. We got to work through that. But I want exit planning a part of that conversation as well. And with exit planning, we have time on our side and some planning. We can make it happen. Even if we don't, I found strategies help people get out. And I will tell you, if you don't have the responsibility and accountability of the operational side of the business, you'll be the best mentor you can ask for.
Yep.
That's huge. It's a big part of it. And exit planning is very much lacking in agriculture today. We've got a lot of work to do.
So, Alan, I like to keep it simple. You know that, the KISS philosophy. Let me share with you what the three terms we're talking about mean to me.
Yeah.
And you tell me if you agree or if you'd add some
Sure.
add some additional detail to that. So I think of transition planning as a process, usually over a period of years, where you're transitioning leadership. And in our case, we're oftentimes talking about from one generation to the next.
Right.
It doesn't have to be, but it's transitioning leadership of decision making and transitioning the decision making process of your business.
Yeah.
Estate planning, I think of that as a planning process, a legal process that puts structure, legal documents, that defines how assets will transition in the business at a point in time, usually at the time of death, but could be at other times. But
Yeah.
it's the legal framework that says here's how it's going to work when the time comes. And then exit planning is basically that leader today that knows he needs to hand it off, he or she needs to hand it off to that next leader. How do they do that gracefully, and what's that look like? And so that's how I look at the three of them. Am I missing anything when I describe it that way?
No, the estate plan is really a plan that distributes wealth upon death.
Yeah.
We just have to clearly say it that way, because when people pass, everything's taken from you. And so a plan will allow you to give it where you want it to go. And that's what estate planning is. But it does align, you have to have legal documents and everything in place to execute upon the plan very much.
Let me interrupt you there, Alan, because I think this is a critical point to be made. If you don't have a plan, there is a plan for you, isn't there?
Yeah, state of South Dakota's got one, or any state that you're in has one for you.
Yeah, so there is a plan.
Yeah.
So no decision is a decision.
That's right.
There's a
That's
plan
right.
out there that's defined for you if you don't direct it your own way. And I think that's one of the big rewards that I take watching you do your work is, you're giving the control to the owners of that business to do it the way they want to, not necessarily the way it's set up to be done at the state law, which is may work in some cases, but in most cases I think we find operations would like to do it a little different than maybe the law would set out for them.
Yeah. Yeah, these are all choices that people can make.
That's right.
Not having a plan is a choice. That's all. And by the way, everybody starts with a plan, a city and pier in South Dakota, so it's you're just trying to customize that to your family and what you want. And if it's not important, that's fine. There's a plan for you. But for most people, they want to do better than what's been set up for them. Yeah, very much so. The estate planning process, it's interesting because it is the distribution of wealth upon your death. Upon the passing of the first, what's going to happen? Upon the passing of the survivor of the two, what's going to happen? Then along the way, as we're going through that process, the old fair and equal thing comes up. And I will tell you, in agriculture, very seldom is it equal. Equal's easy, guys. You just take the balance sheet, we hack it up, and we got equal. It's called dollar. We can do that, but in all the planning I've done, hardly ever. I can't even name one where it's really about that. So I tell people, actually remove that word. If it's not about equal, just remove the word, and you're really about defining fair.
Yep.
If they get focused on that, then they think through all the different reasons that they have from history with their children and what's going on, and we find what I call the sweet spot. And the sweet spot gives people peace. I always know we're getting close because people are getting comfortable, they're finding peace. And so let peace define fair for you, and that's really how it works. But remove the word equal, unless it has application.
Yep.
It's very, very important.
Yeah, if you think about any business, we're talking about farms and ranches now, but if you think of any business, if you're truly going to divide it equally at the time of death to multiple people, the odds of that business being viable going forward from that point forward is not very good, is it?
Right.
I mean, you know, you have to, if keeping the business viable is important, it can't just be a math calculation
Right.
of equal, right? It has to be a plan that's designed to fit your situation.
And that's where the parents, based on the contribution from their children, who's actually in business with them today, there was a point where they were all there, and that's where they're working through as they're trying to define fair. If they're all in the operation today, then that's fine, then we'll figure out how all that works. But just be focused on peace, because at the end of the day, that's what people are looking for. And there's more than one way to do it. And you just got to work through, and again, people, how their wealth is held and their asset makeup and everything else comes to play with that. But yeah, it's about peace. Peace is a key word. It's very important.
Yeah.
We're all looking for it.
Tell me about the importance of communication in the process, Alan.
Communication is critical, whether you're working with somebody today, or whether you're communicating ultimately your ultimate distribution to your family. All those things are decisions you make and how you're going to communicate with people. In this case, it's your family. If we're not talking, obviously there's some reason. To not communicate is an unnatural act. Yes, we have people who are more introverted than other people, but still, communication is a natural thing we need to do if we have partners, if we're working with people. And yes, I know people are running hard, but usually running hard is an excuse or something else going on. Most people have their daily type communication figured out, you know, whether it's coffee in the morning or on texting or whatever it is. But again, these weekly, a little bigger picture, very few have that going on. And I'm big on a monthly meeting because we're going to talk about the financials, we're going to talk about HR, we're going to, you know, and these things all come to play as you deal with the different complexities of the business, the different complexities of people. You'll find there's just different types of communication structures you have to get in place. The only wrong structure is if we're not communicating.
Yeah.
I haven't found really anybody that's over communicating that got in trouble. It's always the under communicating.
I joke with Alan often that he's going to have to write a book someday because of the various situations he finds himself in. They're not all related to communication, but oftentimes, you know, the psychology part, the soft part of what you do is a real factor. Oftentimes it's what keeps people from getting to the finish line.
Yeah, just as the business has complexities, people are even greater complexities. And yet when you can harness the power of that and get heading in the right direction, I can see the opportunities before they can.
Sure.
And again, my job is to facilitate. I may have answers that I see, but I got to help them discover it, because then it's their answers. It'll be more deployable, and it's going to be more sustainable if it's their plan. So my job is really to guide, facilitate, and help them find the answers that are within them. They just don't know it. That's why the history becomes so important.
Yeah.
And anyway, it's there's a lot of change going on in agriculture.
You know, I think you brought up a good point there about they need to find the answers, and you may see options for them.
Mm-hmm.
Some options you may even think are better for them than others based on your background and experience and the number of families you've helped through this process. But we can never make assumptions, right? We
Right.
always have to make sure it's their plan. And what I love about how we go at this is the client. It's the client's plan every step of the way. There's no cookie cutter
No.
to any of this, right? They
No.
design it the way they want it, and it's designed for them based on their
Right.
needs. And when you start, there's kind of a roadmap you go down to discover their plan,
Oh, yeah.
but there's not a plan that you lay in front of them and say, here it is,
Right.
without going through the process.
Yeah, especially in the transition side, it's interesting that I can clearly see at times that the vision doesn't look like it's going to work based on. And first of all, I'm okay with being wrong. It's okay. That allows me to push people. But on the other hand, it's my goal to make sure that they're informed to the level that they're actually making good quality decisions. Even if I think it's wrong, I have to remember it's their operation, it's not mine. Okay? And there's a point where I just have to give it up, and I've got them fully informed, and we're moving along. It's interesting on those where that's been the case, at some point the vision fell apart. But for whatever reason, they wanted to continue heading down this path, which was fine. And then ultimately, the complexities set them back, and now we're regrouping again. But that's what they needed to do to get through that, and that's fine. But it's a journey. All this stuff is a process over a period of time. It is not a moment. And that's critical right there. It takes time. And so I get involved in the operation. That's always one of the initial questions. How long is this going to take? You know, I'll say, I don't know. Because you got differences of decision making, the ability of people to make decisions, to the different complexities that aren't even on the table yet. That my advice is don't try to put it on a clock. My goal on most of the stuff on the transition side, I'm very clear, and I use a word to get the point across. My goal is to get fired. My goal is to get fired because you don't need me anymore. My goal is to work myself out of a job. And I don't consider it as a negative. That should be the goal. It shouldn't be a lifetime there. It should be to get in, help them get to the point that I need to wean myself out. That should be the goal. There's so much work to do.
Yeah. It's interesting, as I've observed from the sidelines, you might say, watching you do your work, you're very sincere in your desire to work yourself out of the job. But so often I see that you got the goal accomplished. Maybe it was to get an estate plan in place, but they don't want you to leave at that point,
yeah.
right? Now it's time to help us with this next thing that we're wrestling with. And certainly that's not the case at every time, but that happens often, doesn't it?
Yeah, it is. You know, the some estate planning ends up being more final because we got documents in place. There's clear closure there. But sometimes, and we move into a strategic planning session with the family and everything else. So there's always work to be done. But sometimes there needs to be some breaks, and then we reconvene back. But also critical on the estate plan. I've helped settle several estates now. I've had clients that have passed. You know, and you don't think about that when you get in this work, but it happens. And to have the hear about it, I'll call the surviving spouse, and the first thing I'll tell them is, after give my condolences, is you've got a great set of documents. Just take care of your family, and don't worry about this. I'll get back to you in 2 to 3 weeks, and we'll start the process. And it'll just be, oh, that sounds so good. You can just feel the pressure come off them, and so that's what they need. Is back to peace. Peace drives everything. It really does.
Yeah, that peace of mind is
Yeah.
an important thing, especially in a time of loss like
Yeah.
that. Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Alan, and the work you do is having tremendous impact. So thanks for all you do, and that's another First Dakota AgriVisions program.